All right, Steve Showen is a counselor from Miami-Dade County, and he's going to talk to us about one good avenue of the Green New Deal.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for coming out this afternoon, and I was very much heartened by your interest in carbon farming. And my exploration of carbon farming...
Closer. Okay, give it a whirl now.
Okay, thank you. Has discovered a much bigger conversation, and which I think offers some inspiration and some interesting options. So I call this talk Carbon Farming and Beyond, Saving the Planet by Transforming Our Relationship with Carbon, featuring biochar. And I've relied heavily on the works of Albert Bates, who I often refer to in this piece. So we've all heard the drill. We have only a decade or so to completely overhaul the foundational elements of modern life, such as our energy, transportation, land use, and food systems, a task of unprecedented scope and pace never before seen in human history. How do we begin? Well, we begin by immediately changing everything that we do with carbon. We must stop putting the carbon into the air. We draw down the excess carbon from the air, and then we need to stash it away somewhere safely for a very long time, and we need to do it ASAP. Because government's missing in action, these imperatives set the frame for political demands, like the Green New Deal, which we just heard of, which connects climate recovery with economic and social justice needs. We join the global movement to bring about the just transition by any and all nonviolent means necessary, including pressuring government and doing direct action. We can also call upon the restorative power of nature, renew our sacred relationship with the soil, reconnect with each other, and come to recognize carbon as an ally instead of our nemesis in healing the planet and ourselves. In the big picture, we need an overhaul of our political economic system that has brought us to this brink. But rather than take that on directly, we can, to quote Bucky Fuller, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's something like the eco-socialism proposal that you just heard. And here's an example that I just put together that may offer some inspiration. For example, imagine a model like this one. Many small farmers, ranchers, cooperatives, craftsmen, and entrepreneurs interlinked in self-reliant local and regional economic networks, serving their community needs, insulated from the downturns of the Wall Street economy. Imagine them engaged in the production of great organic food and herbs, and sustainable industrial feedstocks such as hemp, bamboo, and timber, and biomass for biochar, and sustainable biofuels. And imagine them making and exchanging these products, making products from these materials. Imagine they're achieving a more equitable distribution of power and real wealth. And organized on principles of inclusion, diversity, and ecological and social responsibility. And imagine all this having the smallest possible ecological footprint, being carbon negative, continually stashing away more and more carbon from the atmosphere in the soil, where it will remain for eons to come. I've quoted in there David Corton and Vandana Shiva. So now I'm just going to present a brief outline of the things I'm going to cover in the next few minutes. In this presentation, we'll learn that carbon farming or regenerative agriculture is about using sustainable organic methods to build soil, grow healthy, tasty food, restore the environment, and capture carbon from the air and sequester it in the soil. We learn that the forests have a far greater capacity for capturing and sequestering carbon. We look at the devastation of conventional agriculture has wrought, threatening now to destroy itself. Only by adopting regenerative techniques can agriculture be saved. We learn that soil is the sacred foundation of life. We'll discover biochar and its amazing properties to boost yields and store carbon long-term in farming and forest practices. We'll learn that, as necessary as they are, carbon farming and forestation alone will not be enough to save the planet. But happily, we find that by transforming our relationship with carbon, new vistas open up for its role in planetary recovery. We learn it's ultimately about humans reconnecting with nature, the soil, carbon, and each other. Something jumped ahead here, Kathy. It's not pretty. Okay, wait a minute. I'm okay. I'm okay. All right. And I just skipped the slide, that's all. Okay. So here we're going to talk briefly about conventional agriculture. And the thread is had. Most modern petroleum-fueled agriculture produces about half of all the greenhouse gases emissions worldwide. And they've released more than half of soil's carbon into the atmosphere, desertifying the most fertile food belts on Earth. Conventional agriculture is a threat to our survival. Ironically, agriculture itself is threatened by the climate change that it has helped create. Irregular water availability, massive storms and flooding, drought, and climate warming have reduced crop yields. And we just saw some horrible pictures that Jeff presented there on that subject. Farm profitability is threatened, along with the livelihoods of farmers and ranchers, not to mention the food supply. Historians tell us that civilizations fell with the loss of fertility of their lands and their connection with the soil. This time, it's become a global crisis. International agencies call for a fundamental overhaul of agricultural systems to sustainable methods, taking seriously the traditional agricultural knowledge of small farmers who grow most of the food, and to properly support these farmers. According to a recent report by the UN Commissioner on Human Rights, eco-agriculture is the only way we're going to feed the population of the world by 2040. In a flicker of conscientiousness, the U.S. Senate agriculture hearings on climate change appear to indicate bipartisan support for climate security needs. Commenting on these hearings in the Des Moines Register, conventional farmers Bill Kauser and Scott Henry write that working lands can provide a growing population with food security and essential ecosystem services like carbon sequestration, water filtration, and flood mitigation. They call for Congress to fund climate-smart practices that improve soil productivity, reduce emissions and runoff, increase yield, and strengthen farms' resilience to extreme weather. Yes. In his book, The Biochar Solution, Carbon Farming and Climate Change, Albert Bates elaborates on just what these best climate-smart practices are. He calls it a suite of tools that produce more food per land area and net sequester more carbon every year, build soil, store water, and increase the resiliency of land to withstand storms, floods, and droughts. These new tools include no-till organic farming, agroforestry, aquaponics, key line design, holistic management, remineralization, biochar from biomass energy production, and permaculture. Okay, next slide. To boost the drawdown capacity of these tools and sequester carbon for thousands of years in the soil, Bates calls our attention to a form of pure carbon known as biochar, made by heating organic and woody material in the absence of oxygen in a process of carbonization called pyrolysis. Biochar was rediscovered in the human-made rich black soils of Central and South America that are over 1,000 years old. And of course, Africa and India and China have these human-made soils as well. Unlike labile soil carbon, which cycles through the air and back in less than a decade, recalcitrant carbon, or biochar, can remain intact in the soil for millennia. In fact, they found it in the very soils of the very first forests that ever grew on planet Earth. But surprisingly, when infused with compost tea, the porous biochar sparks an ecosystem boom in the soil, stimulating plant growth, in turn, drawing more carbon from the air. Every harvest yields a certain portion of biomass that can be returned to the soil as biochar, becoming a carbon-negative operation, stashing away more and more carbon every year that will stay there for millennia. Now you can turn the page. Okay. Vandana Shiva cautions us to cultivate the future. We need to cultivate life in the soil. We need to cultivate the humility that soil makes us. We do not make the soil, and we can only serve her process of making life. Leah Penniman is the founder of upstate New York's Soul Fire Farm, which runs farming immersion programs for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. She wrote the title article for Yes Magazine's Spring 19 issue, Beautiful Dirt. By reconnecting with the soil, we heal the planet and ourselves. She informs thus that Black people often associate the land with working the land under the terror of slavery. For many of our ancestors, freedom from terror and separation from the soil were synonymous, she explains. This period devastated Black people's 1,000-year-old sacred relationship with soil. Working to help people renew that relationship by teaching Afro-Indigenous soil regeneration methods, she says, the soil stewards of the past recognize that healthy soil is not only imperative for our food security, it is also foundational for our cultural and emotional well-being. There are many ways to do carbon farming. Polyculture here is the integration of multiple crops in the same area, which reduces susceptibility to disease, increases local biodiversity, and increases yields. The indigenous practice of planting the three sisters together, corn, beans, and squash, is a great example. Next. Agroforestry integrates trees with perennial crops, crops that don't require yearly replanting and have the highest potential for growing food and storing carbon. These crops are grown in layers, with the lower plants shaded by intermediate layer plants with tree canopy in the upper layer. Next. Industrial feedstocks like bamboo and hemp can be carbon farmed. Myriad products can be made from them, which are themselves a carbon sink, until they may eventually be charred and sequestered themselves in the soil. At one time, hemp was considered an indispensable crop in the U.S. In fact, they put it on the $10 bill. You can see it was so valuable to them. After a 70-year hiatus, Florida just approved the growing of industrial hemp. It is hoped many small farmers may participate rather than a few large corporate insiders for the broadest shared economic benefit and the strengthening of rural communities. It can play a role in expanding the knowledge and practice of carbon farming. For reforestation and afforestation. In this picture, at the top, you'll see an example on the left of a barren landscape that was restored after planting trees on the right. At the bottom, you see cutouts of the Amazon forest, which is pretty devastating, and it represents really one of the largest reforestation projects that people are attempting around the world. So we learn as necessary and useful as carbon farming is, it's insufficient to reverse climate change on its own. Because forests can photosynthesize far more carbon than fields and croplands, we need to carefully plan and manage more of them. Annual prunings over the life of the trees can be carbonized into biochar and used to fertilize the forest floor. Each tree contributing 21 tons of carbon over its lifetime, permanently stabilized and sequestered. Showing the right spirit, China recently assigned 60,000 soldiers to plant trees over an area the size of Ireland. Yet, Bates informs us, it's also clear from calculable carbon yields and available land limitations that forests alone will not achieve the Paris goals either. Next. The good news is that evidence is rapidly mounting that the potential for harnessing carbon to reverse climate change extends far beyond agriculture, claims Albert Bates and Kathleen Draper in their book, Burn, Using Fire to Cool the Earth. By healing our relationship with carbon, we can harness its power to replace fossil fuels, revitalize communities, rebuild infrastructure, and reverse climate change. This approach, says Bates, doesn't come at an enormous cost or great risk. To the contrary, it can save companies and cities and communities money and provide a new revenue stream. It contains the seeds of a new circular economy in which energy, natural resources, and human ingenuity enter a virtuous cycle of improvement with bold new solutions that can begin right now. Next. Carbon cascades are at the heart of this circular economy. Recalcitrant carbon passes along a chain from one useful stage to another as food, then filter, fodder, and providing useful services like heating, cooling, and power generation, restoring degraded soils, and mitigating climate effects. Used repeatedly in various ways, carbon is eventually entombed either in the soil or in building materials like concrete for roads and high-rises, which it improves their physical properties. Not only strength, lightness, flexibility, they're discovering all the possibilities that forms of carbon can do that would change our material structural world, including, nanostructures and nanotech, supercapacitors. The list is endless. The benefits of these captured carbon cascades improve the standard of living of all the participants in a growing local economy. A bio-based circular economy could be created by carbonizing everything from biomass, crops, seaweed, municipal waste, and sewage biosolids. Outputs could include energy co-products like electricity, heat, fuel cells, and capacitors. Biorefinery co-products include fresh water, protein, food, medicines, fertilizer, and consumer goods. What is avoided is landfills and incinerators, mining and transportation, energy, CO2 emissions, manufactured fertilizer. Whereas our national government remains in climate denial paralysis, mayors across the other hand, across the country have vowed to take action. They're receptive to proposals that not only can help save the planet, but also save their cities money and solve their environmental and waste problems to boot. A quadruple win. Next. Take Stockholm for just one example. Faced with the problem of urban tree survivability from natural disasters, Stockholm developed new biochar enhanced structured soils for urban landscaping. In this picture, there's a diagram at the bottom there of the special techniques that they developed and how they supported every tree with this new technology. So Stockholm developed new biochar enhanced structured soils for urban landscaping. Urban trees provided services estimated over $500 million for Stockholm. Now trees more easily survive these disasters, and they're not having to be replaced, and that's enormous cost savings for Stockholm. The change also reduced both the volume and contamination of stormwater going to the city's wastewater management system, reducing these costs as well. These solutions won Stockholm the 2014 Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge for showing that what can be adopted by other cities. Stockholm has since created a closed-loop production facility to upcycle its urban green wastes and produce energy and its own biochar. I'm quoting Albert Bates here. He says, "It all comes down to how well any community, be it a rural cluster of farms or an urban neighborhood, fends for itself in the volatile world of the 21st century." He gives examples of communities that have created regenerative circular economies based on their local human and natural assets, caring for everyone, protecting the planet, and reaching out to help the less fortunate neighbors. Here's just one story that he gives. This is Govardhan Eco Village in India, and it appears to be part ashram, part resort, and part farming and teaching complex. It's quite a setup. But it has a philosophy that they call symbiotic recycling, a merger of science and Vedic teachings that integrates organic farming, biogas, and green buildings into a circular economy. Organic fertilizers, compost, and mulch are produced locally at practically no cost. Biogas replaces wood for cooking. Gray water and black water flow to bioreactors that use plants, earthworms, and aerobic microbes to remove suspended soils, pathogens, and odor, returning energy and fertilizer. India has long been a leader in biochar. Dr. Reddy of the Appropriate Rural Technology Institute has been taking biochar compost blends to farmers, making biochar bricks for green buildings and using biochar powders for waterless cleaning and designing efficient home stoves. Worldwide, the three-stone open fire is currently responsible for more childhood deaths than malaria, 8 million last year. Reddy has personally trialed more than 50 designs of low-cost gasifier stoves for homes and businesses. These are stoves that use woody material to turn it into biochar, but you reap benefits from it, like heat and so forth. And these stoves can be little tiny things like this big, or so big, or as big as a factory. I mean, making biochar is very complex and very practice. Now, Govardhan Village is passing its Symbiont practices to 16 nearby tribal villages. And that's the one thing that Bates points out with many of his other examples. These eco-villages, if you will, are experiments in a way, and what they learn now, they're using to propagate it and multiply it outwards to infuse the culture as much as they can. So in conclusion, there's no silver bullet when it comes to climate change. No single strategy will suffice. To rescue the human prospect from the climate event now brewing, we will need to radically change everything about how humans live on Earth. We have to go from spending carbon to banking it. Bates prescribes reforestation while simultaneously curbing carbon emissions and making biochar an integral part of the forest and the energy and the industrial mix, to reverse the direction carbon is going, from up to down. Carbon abuse and waste become carbon abundance. Then circular economies begin to cascade, saving companies and countries money while regenerating landscapes, communities, and ecosystems. Next. Scorned and abused, carbon can become your worst nightmare. Embrace her and make her your friend. She can easily save you or destroy you. Wouldn't you rather she welcome you back to her garden planet? Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much for that,
Thank you.
that view of a solution to the problems that we're facing and our framing of our Green New Deal panel that we'll be having here shortly.